How many bullets should it take to put somebody in the dirt? It's kind of a loaded question, isn't it? Why does this game, and a few others, have a bullet sponge problem, and how do you fix it? Join me, some guy who has never studied game design and barely passed one semester of Java programming, as I try to dissect the infinite mandala of decisions that turns an RPG into CBT. So you're making a video game, and surprise, it's an RPG. Generally that means that you want to turn something like this into something like this. Seems like a wild transformation, but the game at its core isn't actually changed that much. Combat is all about numbers. What level are you? What level is the enemy you're fighting? What weapon are you using? What condition is it in? It turns out computers are pretty good at this kind of math. So good that you can actually run these calculations in real time and watch combat play out. Well, maybe not exactly real time, but close enough that you wouldn't really be able to tell the difference otherwise. There is a catch, however. Doing all of these calculations in real time slightly changes how the game is played. See if you can spot the difference here. Here, I'm going to attack an enemy in a tabletop RPG. And here, I'm going to attack an enemy in Fallout New Vegas. Did you spot the difference there? For all the numbers that computers can crunch, this is probably the hardest part to get right in a real-time RPG. How do you create a system that's both satisfying and responsive here, but meaningful here? Or, in the case of the 3D Fallout games, how do you translate this into this? As much as I prefer to ignore Fallout 3's existence, I can't really deny that Bethesda actually had a pretty decent go at it. It wasn't anything mind-blowing when you consider how similar Oblivion's core systems were and previous games before that, but their adaptation of Fallout to a 3D shooter had enough novelty to be a bestseller, and to earn a spot on the very prestigious Wikipedia article List of Video Games Considered to be the Best, which also has Destiny on it. Obsidian's permutation on Fallout 3 has basically the same combat equations minus a few adjustments, chiefly reintroducing damage thresholds from the original games and scaling back the damage resistance system. I'm not really going to go over the exact details of what those changes are because this script is already too long. We're just here to identify one of our primary suspects, that being the difficulty modifier. The difficulty setting that you see in the menus of New Vegas and all of the other Bethesda, Gamebryo, Creation Engine games is just a damage multiplier. The harder you set the difficulty, the more damage enemies deal to you, the less you deal to them. It might seem like a robust system when you slot it into an equation like this and you just run the numbers, but in practice, it actually kinda sucks dick. You see, there's more to this game's difficulty than just the menu setting. No matter what difficulty you select, a mole rat is always going to be easier to kill than a deathclaw, and that's because deathclaws are death with a pair of claws, and mole rats are, moles that are also rats. The design of an enemy itself dictates a great deal about how difficult it should feel to fight it. This applies not only to just stats, but also things like behavior or where and when they might spawn. So when you start pushing the big damage slider in the sky around to create more difficulty,
go stupid! Go crazy! Yeah! Go stupid! Go crazy!
So how do you fix it? Well, modders have been trying for like 10 years, so let's see what they came up with. A damage multiplier. There's a tricky thing with damage multipliers. Once you get to a point where guns are feeling nice and visceral, anything that uses melee is just going to get eviscerated before it gets in range, and that also includes the player.
Wait a minute. Isn't that what should happen when a guy with a sword runs at a guy with a gun?
Yes, very astute observation. Now let's try to use 100% of our brains for a moment, right? And let's remember that New Vegas is a role-playing game, and that the lovely designers over at Obsidian tried their darndest to make all of these skills and special stats feel like viable options for your character, right? I mean, charisma is kind of bad and luck is, like, stupid, but they tried, okay? Point being, they tried. Multiplying all of the damage values wholesale probably nerfs melee way too hard. Maybe you could make a case for rebalancing it by giving melee characters more speed or something. But like even in my test with extra movement speed and sprinting, the gap between melee and ranged is too far. Ooh, maybe if you could do melee attacks while you're sprinting. Anyway, adding another big damage multiplier to the equation kind of feels like using a big hammer for a small nail, so let's just see what else the modders have. Damage settings. The damage threshold and resistance options are nice, I guess, but it doesn't really address the core imbalances at play here. Realistic weapons damages. Damage multipliers modify to make combat more tactical. Yeah, that's just more multipliers. Fallout 4 survival mode damage, which that's just a different multiplier. Realistic damage, same thing. Oh, here we go. Critical damage overhaul. Projectile-based damage, bleeding, dynamic armor, and HP, okay. Fatigue overhaul, altered carry weight capacity, chem overdose. Ugh. I get that it's convenient or whatever to make one big overhaul mod that changes all of your issues with the game and makes them better, but like, does it have to be one giant mod? Can you at least put some settings in there, make it a little modular? Where was I? Alright. 3 times weapon damage. Weapon damage increase, higher damage, double damage, hardcore damage. Why don't we try thinking a little outside of the box here, huh? Maybe there's something else here we can adjust, like AI. You can make enemies less predictable, you could give them tactics, you could give them individualized behaviors, and... Oh. Okay, I'm not saying it's impossible to improve the combat AI with mods, but in the 10 plus years since this game's release, there hasn't been much of value on this front. The few mods that are current and stable only make small adjustments to specific features like detection or pathing. There's the XFO overhaul suite, which claims to have reworked behaviors and tactics for most enemies, but it also hasn't been updated in about 10 years and might also cause save bloat, so we're going to pretend that that doesn't exist. Maybe with the advent of NVSE and other handy mod tools, a revised approach to this is possible, but even then, I'm not really sure this is the answer that we're looking for. Surely there must be some example to go by. Something that has real difficulty, but satisfying mechanics. Something that embraces a myriad of playstyles, but still forces the player to, like, think during combat. Something that... Oh, of course! Doom Eternal. Have you ever noticed how it feels like the enemies in Doom are all working together to fight you? I don't think that's the product of some state-of-the-art combat decision matrices. The enemies are designed in a way that makes it impossible for them not to work together. A Mancubus will slowly push you out of your position to create opportunities for other demons. Gargoyles will pull your aim up and away from enemies on the ground. Marauders are the worst, and I dislike them very much. The AI's behavior is relatively simple, but it's focused to fit so that each enemy is as unique to fight as they look. Mixing the different combinations of enemies turns standard engagements into like multi-solution puzzles that need to be solved. And increasing the difficulty does make the enemies significantly tankier, but you're equipped with so many weapons and abilities that you always have just enough breathing room to come out on the other side. This level of engagement is exactly what I think New Vegas' combat is missing. I mean, it tries. Guns and energy weapons have special ammo types, melee weapons have the special VATS attacks that you might remember to use sometimes. But how many of these things actually fundamentally change the way that you'll approach an encounter? I mean, how much thought do you have to put into using hollow point for fleshy things and armor piercing for armory things? There are plenty of weapons to choose from in New Vegas, but The 5 weapon skills make up less than half of the 13 total skills. Being proficient in melee guns, energy weapons, and explosives probably means that you're short in skills like repair, speech, science, lockpicking, important skills as well. With the extended level cap introduced by DLC, you can eventually round out everything, but not before playing most of the game first.
Okay, Slabman, how do you fix it then, huh?
I think the issue of bullet sponginess is a condition that's created by the combat environment. Stats and weapons and creature designs and player skills, all of these play some role in the issue, and naturally, to some extent, how's the solution? If I had to come up with a solution myself, I would probably try... Hey, you know those NCR heavy troopers? Like the 7 of them that spawn in the game? Yeah, the game likes to save those powerful enemy variants for when you reach higher levels, but I think it would actually be appropriate if your selected difficulty also had an effect on the types of enemies that you see. I actually have no idea how feasible this would be to implement into the game, but I think it has potential if done prudently. This could also incentivize playing on higher difficulties by giving players better drops from more powerful enemies when they kill them, but that might also break the economy? I don't know, I'm not a game designer. Allowing a melee user to get close to you should be a problem. On a related note, let melee users sprint and attack at the same time so they can get close and be a problem. Maybe introduce something like a DT-based stun system where breaking an enemy's DT with melee can prevent them from attacking for a second or so. I don't know. That sounds cool. Something kind of like that to make melee as viable as ranged combat when you crank the damage. Ideally, these adjustments will also incentivize using VATS for precise shots that you don't want to miss, rather than just using VATS in every encounter all the time. Slowing down and picking apart encounters at the risk of being vulnerable sounds like a fair exchange to me. I'm not a game designer. Adjusting damage and difficulty like this is invariably just going to throw off the value of most combat skills and perks. As a starting point, I would probably recommend using the weapon skill requirement from Stewie's INI tweaks. Examine perks on a case-by-case basis, probably. When in doubt, lean towards making things kind of overpowered. It's better to have a paralysis of choice from having too many good options than no good options, particularly in single-player games. Again, these are all kind of ideas that I'm floating out there that aren't necessarily original or maybe even good ideas, but this is a complicated issue. Trying to resolve bullet sponginess and not destroy combat is kind of a gargantuan task. For that reason alone, I might even just recommend not trying to do it at all. Some people might even make the case that the game doesn't have a bullet sponge problem and this doesn't even need to be addressed. But I think at least some of the ideas that I wrote here about are at least worth thinking about. Maybe. I'm not a game designer.